glad and I want to congratulate the World Affairs Council for deciding to focus on Venezuela. It's not a topic that tends to cheer a lot of people up, but it is the most important issue in our hemisphere by far, and perhaps in the world, one of the most tragic situations. So I'll let Mayor talk about the situation on the ground and the dimensions and scope and scale of all of these crises, which are very, very profound. What I'm going to look at is U.S. policy responses to the Chávez and then the Maduro regime over time, to give some background and perspective. And then talk about some options. Where are we today? Right? And what is going to resolve this crisis and when, which is the question all of us who have been following Venezuela very closely have been asking for a long time. I want to leave a lot of comments for questions and a lot of time for questions and comments. We talked about a soliloquy. Hugo Chávez once called my organization, which is the Inter-American Monologue. So I want to disprove that, and I want to give a lot of time to get your questions and have a good exchange. How did we get to this awful place that Mayor Smolansky will describe when he arrives? One point is that Venezuela was not in great shape before Hugo Chávez was elected in 1998 and took office in early 1999, exactly 21 years ago. It's a country that, for those of you who follow Latin America, know that the 1980s was the so-called lost decade. Venezuela had two lost decades. You had the 1980s and the 1990s, and lost 40% of its national income over those 2 decades. So Chávez emerged for a reason, and he won the election in 1998 for a reason. He got 56% of the vote, which what everybody concedes was a free and fair election. And he was railing against traditional order, indicting the elites, populist, but he put his finger, I think, on the legitimate grievance that Venezuelans had. Venezuelans were very poor. They were victims of mismanagement and corruption. This is before Chávez. And I'm certainly not going to compare today to then, but I think the context is important because he emerged for a reason. And Venezuela is where it is for a reason. So I think he put his finger on the legitimate grievances that people had. It was a very exclusionary system, high levels of inequality, political parties were corrupt, discredited. All the things that one hears about today, about many places in the world, that's what Venezuela was like in 1998. And Chávez was an alternative. And the problem fundamentally is that Chávez came in and he made all decisions. He kind of went about systematically dismantling every democratic institution and concentrating power in his own hands. So, and what resulted were extraordinarily high levels of incompetence, corruption, mismanagement that we see today at a totally different level of magnitude. But that's what happened. And he was very antagonistic towards the private sector, many of whom worked in the oil industry. And Venezuela is totally dependent on oil. 95% of its exports of oil. Has been this way. Chávez promised to change it. He didn't change it. It's still this way today. That was one of his promises he didn't fulfill. So a lot of people were very, very frustrated and angry, and he came as kind of the savior. Very charismatic person. I met him a couple of times. And he had, when he came in, to understand where we are today, oil was $10 a barrel when he came in 1999. In 2006 or 7, they went up to $140 a barrel. This is the country with the largest proven oil reserves in the world. When Hugo Chávez would attack the United States, they would tit for tat, go back and forth, and Chávez always won those battles. It was, I think, in my view, I said it back then, it was a mistake to do that. And of course, Chávez led the coalition of Latin American governments against the United States during the Iraq War, which was very unpopular in Latin America and other parts of the world. And Chávez was very good at taking advantage of that for his own political purposes. President Obama comes in. Things continue to get worse. There was just a gradual deterioration. He is extremely concerned about Venezuela. It's a high priority for the administration. He raises it with other heads of state. But he has a different style than President Bush and President Trump. There was support for efforts for negotiations between the government and the opposition to try to encourage a diplomatic solution to the crisis. That didn't work out very well. And the Obama administration also started what today is the key policy toward Venezuela, which is sanctions. But they only did targeted individual sanctions for those accused of corruption and rights violations, would freeze your assets, particularly your visa or whatever it is, individually, for those who were found to be responsible. And Obama began that. Trump comes in and takes a much harder line against Maduro. I think more aggressive, certainly rhetorically, and also in policy. He expanded and strengthened the sanctions regime, increased the targeted individual sanctions, then imposed financial sanctions. And then just a year ago, he did something that we always call, back in the old days when Chávez was around, the nuclear option, which is sectoral sanctions on the oil sector. And today, that is the principal instrument that's being used by the administration against Maduro, together with diplomatic isolation of the Maduro regime. And the United States, to its credit, has been working with other Latin American countries, especially Colombia, which is the most affected by the crisis, as David Smolansky will tell you shortly, and Brazil. So there has been a multilateral effort. The politics have changed over time. The recent elections in Mexico and Argentina, which are two very important Latin American countries, have not been helpful. There is a much softer, neutral approach and unwillingness to really be very harsh against Maduro. So the politics has changed a little bit. But the United States is talking to other governments and the Europeans to try to work together. There's a key debate going on. I'm sure Mr. Smolansky will talk about this. You may have different views about it, but whether these sanctions are having the effect of making an already terrible situation for which Nicolas Maduro is responsible even worse, and therefore fueling the refugee crisis, or whether really these sanctions are designed in a way that really just hurt the regime and don't hurt ordinary Venezuelans. I'm of the view, and I've seen a lot of studies, that they are hurting ordinary Venezuelans. It's hard to have sanctions against the only source of income of your economy, and not have it affect ordinary people. So, again, the regime is responsible, and it may be justified. Maybe you have to do that because you have to put the pressure that's on, and maybe it forces Maduro to go to the table and to negotiate in good faith. He hasn't been able to do it. You can make that argument, but I think that it is aggravating an already very, very serious situation that the mayor will talk about in a second. Trump comes in and comes up with a formulation that still is around called "all options are on the table." He said that in August of 2017. Of course, we all know that all options are always on the table for any foreign policy challenge that the United States confronts. I question whether saying threats to the Venezuelan military also coming from Washington, saying that we're going to go after you, we're going to being very aggressive, which in my view has the opposite effect of what it's intended to have. It makes them dig even further. They're not going to listen to a foreign power, especially the United States. A year ago, or a little over a year ago, Juan Guaido emerges as the interim president by virtue of the Constitution. He's the president of the National Assembly, which is the only democratic legitimate institution in Venezuela. It was first voted in the opposition in December of 2015. And there was a view in Washington, I think, that this was the end. Finally, you had a leader, a young leader, a popular leader, Mr. Smolansky's generation, which is the hope for Venezuela, that generation, his generation. And he was able to unite the opposition, and he had a theory. The theory was, we're going to get everybody out on the street. We're going to get millions of people out on the street. And the armed forces, which is the main underpinning and pillar of the Maduro regime, is going to flip. They're not going to go after. They're not going to go after people on the streets. They're going to see that the people are with the opposition, and therefore they will shift, abandon Maduro. It didn't happen, and I think there was a lot of overconfidence that it would happen, and it didn't happen. And I think it was a little bit unrealistic in retrospect that would happen. So that produced a lot of disappointment and frustration because there were promises, and I was been in Washington and saw it in Washington. A lot of senior officials said, "This is over. We're going to do it well." And President Trump himself was told that this was going to solve the problem. There was also an effort last year by the Norwegians to try to pursue a negotiation to create conditions for free and fair elections. There were meetings in Oslo and Barbados with representatives from the Guaido and Maduro. Talks broke down for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of skepticism about negotiations are really viable because they have been tried and they have failed. Because the government was not acting in good faith and was playing games. Today we have a very difficult moment. President Guaido, by all accounts, has less support than he had a year ago because the change that was promised wasn't delivered. Maduro is still in office as a de facto president of Venezuela, and there's no sign that the armed forces are about to abandon. But he is the most popular politician in Venezuela. He has about 45%, according to a poll I saw today. Maduro may have 12%, 14%, and over 80% of Venezuelans, according to all the polls, want to change the government. This is not a question of a divided country. This is a country that desperately wants change, but you have a repressive regime that uses the armed forces, that uses the police, that uses vigilante groups, and carries out repressive measures as they have done with Mayor Smolansky and other figures of the opposition. So they have to leave the country. Just to talk about breaking news, and maybe you'll have some information on this. President Guaido left the country several days ago. He met with Secretary of State Pompeo in Bogota, and met with Boris Johnson, he met with Macron, various other meetings ahead of the European Union in Europe, and met with Prime Minister Trudeau. We're still waiting to hear whether there's going to be a meeting with President Trump, and maybe David could give us the news. But let me just say for the record, from my perspective, I think it would send a very, very bad signal that President Trump does not leave him. After investing so much in this cause, it could be interpreted that there's not the unflagging, unwavering support that the U.S. has talked about. And a meeting with him, I think, would be essential. I'm sure the mayor agrees with me. I don't know if it's going to happen. He's going to speak in Miami on Saturday. mention that as something that's kind of in the air. This is the most, by far, the most important issue on Latin American policy. If you talk to members of Congress and if you talk to members of the U.S. administration, it's striking what percentage of their time is devoted to Venezuela. People work on South America. South America is a lot of countries. There are big countries: Argentina, there's Brazil, there's Colombia. They work 90% on Venezuela. That's what they're focused on because of the gravity of the situation in that country. Now, what's the plan today? Well, I'm not sure. Guaido's message has been to get more people to join the sanctions regime, to increase sanctions, to increase the pressure, to get the Europeans to do a lot more than they've done, because they haven't done very much, by and large. But will they work? They haven't worked over the last year. The oil sanctions went into effect a year ago. We're here a year later, and they haven't worked. So it's hard to make the case that they will. I think, or at least there are some doubts or questions whether they will. And the Maduro regime has been more resilient than many people expected. As I said, over 80% of the people want change, but the armed forces remain with him because they have economic interests, because of corruption, and they're very involved in the Venezuelan economy. Because of fear of the regime, many military officials are in jail because they were suspected of challenging the government. So there's a tremendous amount of fear. And for some Venezuelans, there's still the revolution of Hugo Chávez 21 years ago. There's a Bolivarian revolution. It's not a big percentage, but while Maduro has 12, 15%, Hugo Chávez has 56% support in Venezuela. He has a favorable image by the people of the country. So Maduro has adapted to these tough sanctions. Russia is playing an increasingly important role. Maduro has China on his side, has Cuba on his side, has Turkey on his side. There has also been an expansion or proliferation of illicit economies, drug trafficking, illegal gold mining, armed groups. Many of the armed groups are engaged in these activities, illicit activities, armed groups in Venezuela, armed groups in Colombia, where there are guerrilla groups that have come over and are based in Venezuela. And recently, an effort to dollarize the economy, which has enabled the country to import a bit more, at least in certain areas of Caracas, the capital, not the rest of the country, but Caracas. So there's more access to products. They don't have the severe shortages, at least in certain places that there was before. Now, this may be a bubble, and I think it's a bubble, but it's there. It's there. And the fact that you see more things on the shelves in markets than you did before. So what do? I think military action will not happen and should not happen. And again, I don't think there's any appetite for it. The other idea is that there's a popular uprising. I see that as highly improbable. I don't see any sign of that at all. So I think that despite the disappointing record on negotiations, it's an option that could build on the mistakes of previous negotiations. And even Secretary of State Pompeo said in recent weeks that this is something that the United States could support. We also need to get more actors involved. This is a global issue. Venezuela is on the global chessboard. So it's not just this region, this hemisphere. It's Russia, it's China, it's Turkey, it's India, and others. And the armed forces have to be involved too. That's where the power is. And they haven't been up until now. So I think there are ideas on how to make it more effective. The political solution may take time. It's more complicated than we believed a year ago. We have to create the conditions for it. It's going to be pretty messy. And there has to be a lot of humility about this. I don't think anybody can be very confident of what's going to work these days because things have been tried and they haven't worked. But I think that the right mix of carrots and sticks, pressure, plus guarantees and some incentives for the regime may help lead towards democratic elections and a transition in the country. Let me just say 2 final points, and then I'll turn it over to the real expert. One is I hope that in 2020, that decisions by the United States regarding Venezuela are taken in terms of policies that could help lead to a democratic transition in Venezuela. Venezuela is also a domestic political issue, especially in the state of Florida. We have an election this year. Florida is a battleground state, and I'm hoping that electoral politics doesn't shape what kind of decisions are made by the administration, because the diaspora community, Venezuelans and the Cubans, Nicaraguans, others are all concentrated in South Florida. South Florida is a swing state. So I'm just hoping, I just want to point that out, and hoping that doesn't happen. There's just too much stake to let domestic politics really shape decisions. Today, Venezuelans are desperate to be saved from Hugo Chávez's ruinous legacy. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be at Richmond. I would like to start expressing my apologies for coming late. It was a very bad accident when we were getting out of DC, and it took us more than 3 hours. I'm happy to be here, happy to see so many people that is interested in what's going on in my country. When I say my country, I was born in Venezuela. And actually I was 13 years old. I was beginning at high school when a soldier that so many people saw as a savior won an election in Venezuela, Hugo Chávez. Today, 21 years after, Venezuela is suffering from the worst humanitarian crisis that probably any country in the region has ever suffered. We have lost our freedom. We have lost our democracy. We are separated from our families. And like me, where I've been living in exile for more than 2 years after I was forced to flee my country. More than half of my life has been under this tragic revolution. So I would like to start formally with what I'm doing, and then I could talk on things internally in Venezuela and a little bit about my story and the story of so many colleagues. As I was said in the introduction, I am working at the Organization of American States. I am the special envoy for the Secretary General to address the Venezuelan migration and refugee crisis in the region. And I started working there because when I fled my country after being 35 days in hiding, and I had to go through a jungle in Brazil, and after I got to Brazil, I knew that I was not 100% free, because no one is free when you cannot go back to your country, but at least I was in a safe place. When I saw around, I saw all the people fleeing Venezuela at the same time. I saw people fleeing because of hunger, starvation, lack of medicine, lack of electricity, lack of water, persecution, violence. And when I saw that, one of the most difficult things for a public servant, a politician, is when you are in exile, how you could be active, working for your country. And I decided to start visiting the border and starting to have meetings with the diaspora and with Venezuelans that had fled. When I started to do that, we were 1.5 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees. Now we are 5 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees. This is by far the largest migration and refugee crisis in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean. We are the largest displaced population in the world with no natural catastrophe and no conventional war. And if we include those countries that have suffered from natural catastrophe and conventional war, only Syria is above Venezuela. But if there is no solution during this year in my homeland, probably by the end of 2020, the world would see more Venezuelan refugees than Syrian refugees. And that will happen again with no earthquake, with no tsunami, with no hurricane, and with no conventional war. So one of the lessons is that when you don't have democracy and you don't have freedom, also you can have millions of people fleeing, trying to find opportunities in other parts of the world. So last year I visited the region 16 times. I went to Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Curaçao, Aruba, Mexico, Costa Rica. Also have had different meetings with the Venezuelan community here in the US and also in Canada. And I had ever seen in my life, not even when I was mayor, I had to deal with so many difficult challenges, like, for example, trying to decrease kidnapping. I've never seen so much suffering of what I have seen on those visits. I visited a refugee camp of an indigenous community in Brazil, where a man told me that his 8 children died because of lack of medicine. I saw a teenager telling me in tears that her mom was lying to her for weeks, that she was having lunch and breakfast, but she was not, because the only food that she had, it was for her, until she found that her mom was lying, and she told her, you will not die because of me, because of guaranteeing me to have the food and you not, so we have to flee Venezuela. I've seen so many students that have been brutally repressed by the regime with tanks, with rubber bullets, with bullets, that have been in jail, like the one that is called the Tom, which is in Caracas. It is in Caracas underground, where you don't have visits, you cannot see your lawyers, you have extreme temperatures to get tortured, and if you don't talk, you could get killed, like Fernando Albán was killed at Caracas Council one that was thrown from a 7th floor in a jail in Venezuela. So basically what I want to say here is that we're having a country in this hemisphere that is having the same consequences on migration, on the economic, on socially and politically, the same as countries that have been through a war. If you see any indicators of Venezuela, it is only compared with countries that have passed, that have war, have had any other collapse. 5 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees is more than the whole population of countries like Croatia in Europe, Ireland, Costa Rica, Panama, Kuwait, or New Zealand. That's the whole population of those countries is fewer than the Venezuelans that are now displaced. And actually, the people that are fleeing Venezuela is not middle class, it's not people that are in a good position. I mean, the vast majority of people that are fleeing Venezuela come from very poor areas, rural areas. So they don't have even the money to buy a bus ticket and don't think about any air flight ticket. So you have started to see what it is known in Spanish as los caminantes, in English the walkers. So they just flee Venezuela literally walking. from Cúcuta in Colombia, which is the border to Venezuela, to Lima, the capital of Peru, or to Santiago, the capital of Chile. So that is about at least 4,000 kilometers. 4,000 kilometers is pretty much the same, to give you a perspective. If we start walking right now, from here, Richmond, to Salt Lake City, how desperate, may I ask this, how desperate has to be someone to walk from Richmond to Salt Lake City to find a place to sleep, to find a place to eat, to find a hospital to cure his diseases, or just literally find a place to be safe? How desperate someone has to be to walk again from Richmond to Salt Lake City. How desperate has to be a woman to walk that distance to give birth. 70% of the women that are giving birth in the border in Colombia are Venezuelans. And 70% of the women that are giving birth in Brazil are also Venezuelans. At least 1.5 million of the Venezuelans that have fled are suffering or are in risk to suffer from malnutrition. How desperate has to be a young student to take a boat like the Cubans used to do decades ago to get to Aruba or Curaçao. Those islands used to live from the tourism that came from Venezuela. Now they are receiving people in a very vulnerable situation where they get through boats or they get to their swim. So in my opinion, it's no better evidence of the horror that what Venezuelans have been living when you visit any country in the region that has received hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans. Colombia, 1.6 million Venezuelans. Peru, 900,000 Venezuelans. Chile, 400,000 Venezuelans. Ecuador, 400,000 Venezuelans. Brazil, 230,000 Venezuelans. Argentina, 150,000 Venezuelans. Panama, 100 Venezuelans. United States of America, 450,000 Venezuelans. Spain, 330,000 Venezuelans. So this is not only in Colombia, this is not only in Brazil, which are the worst. So this is a regional or a global problem that is, of course, impacting on the infrastructure, the service, and the budget of those countries. And I have to say, anytime that Venezuelans have had the opportunity to work, most of them have been successful and are impacting positively on those economies, because every Venezuelan that is fleeing the country is leaving a son, a daughter, a mom, a sister, a brother in Venezuela. The most shattering story that I've heard, especially from young people, is that they have said goodbye to their parents or to their grandparents because they don't know if they will see it again. Especially if they have grandparents of 70 or 80 years old, and for them it's very difficult to flee Venezuela. They just say goodbye because they don't know when they go back. That's the story that I heard here. So how we get here? And I said Professor Schitzer was doing a very good lesson on Venezuela. Well, how did we get here? Venezuela used to be one of the most stable countries in the region. It used to be a reference on democracy in the region. It used to have a booming economy. It used to have a solid democracy. When you saw on the 1960s, on the 1970s, so many countries in the region in war, with hyperinflation, with dictatorships. Venezuela had free media, had an alternative in power, had free and fair elections, had legal political parties, and people were doing good. But the economy was not diversified. It depended only in oil, which was, in my opinion, a mistake, especially when you have a country that you can diversify its economy. I'm going to talk about it later if we have the time. And also the political parties did not renew the leadership. So we saw presidents that were president in the 1970s be president again on 1990s. So then came this guy, Chávez, And one of the memories that I had when I was a boy, and I was with my father watching TV, it was at midnight of February 4th, 1992. And I see a tank, military tank, trying to get to the palace. I think that's my first political memory that I have. And I asked my father, what's that? And my father told me, this is a coup d'etat. It's a coup d'etat against the president of Venezuela. Then this guy became a savior, Chávez. And I didn't like him because he used weapons and he killed a lot of innocent people to try to get to power in 1992. He failed twice, but he tried. And in that moment, so many innocent people were killed and were wounded. But a lot of Venezuelans saw him like a hero. That was something necessary. And he was elected in 1998. How was he elected president in 1998? We had free and fair elections. Anyone who wanted to run as a president was allowed to. We had political parties, we had free media, we had an alternative in power. So one of the lessons that I wanted to share with you today in Venezuela is that we are probably one of the best examples in the world right now that how democracy is used to destroy democracy. That's what happened in Venezuela. In Venezuela, democracy was used. The tools that democracy gives to the leaders and societies were used to destroy democracy. And now here we are in a dictatorship, which in my opinion is not even a conventional dictatorship. This is not another caudillo in Latin America. We're facing, this is a very personal opinion, a criminal regime, a criminal state that goes beyond a dictatorship. But it started 21 years old. When it was 13, that's why I wanted to start with that. Using democracy, and they destroyed democracy. So yes, they had elections, and they changed the constitution. So suddenly, people elected a president to be for 5 years with no re-elections, and then he changed the constitution less than a year after he was elected, and suddenly we have a president that from being elected for 5 years and not having re-elections, now 6 years with indefinite re-election. And then everything became centralized. And then our generation that Shifter said very kind words, and I appreciate, it started in 2007 when the oldest TV station in Venezuela was shut down, Radio Caracas Televisión. And the student movement started in 2007. But that was already 12 years ago. Because that's how the generation of President Guaido and I, that were studying together, decided, well, we have to go to the streets, lead nonviolent protests to defend freedom, to defend democracy, to defend the freedom, of expression. And here we are. So, when I say this, is that other lesson is when you see any leader that has authoritarian characteristic and is trying to control the best defense that any country has is its civil society. And what I learned from Chávez is that he made the most radical change, or one of the most important change at the beginning of his first term, specifically when he changed the constitution. And after that, everything was more difficult. So what we're having now, we're having an unprecedented situation in Venezuela. We're having a regime that is usurping power, that is still in the palace, as Mr. Shifter said. Well, we have an interim government that started a year ago. And you say, how that happened? Well, in 2018, Maduro was elected or re-elected president of Venezuela. Even the electoral council that he controls said that almost 70% of Venezuelans didn't go to vote, which was, in my opinion, very important. The electoral council that he controls said that almost 7 out of 10 Venezuelans didn't vote. more than 50 countries didn't recognize that election, called it a fraud. Organizations such as the Organization of American States called that illegitimate. And in January of 2019, taking the Constitution, which has a very important article to explain what's going on in Venezuela, Article 233, says that when there is a vacuum of power, the Speaker of the House becomes the interim president. So, President Guaido was sworn as the President of National Assembly, and after January 10th, which is the date that the President should start the term in Venezuela, the vacuum of power was declared, and President Guaido was sworn as interim President of Venezuela, with a huge support of the people. Still, the main leader of Venezuela has become a leader of the region and worldwide. He has just, as Mr. Schifter said, he's just in an international agenda. We had a very important meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, Macron. Probably the next phase we'll have that meeting with President Trump, we'll see. And he has been recognized by almost 60 countries. So why is not why have we not been able to get rid of the regime, which would be a lot of questions. Again, because we're facing a criminal regime. A criminal regime that is running drug trafficking, illegal mining, smuggling. Those are the many illicit activities that they are running. With the regular groups that were created in Venezuela, what we call in Spanish colectivos armados, which are basically civil guerrillas that are in a lot of them in urban places, ELN from Colombia, and the support in very important international actors such as Cubans, which at least 23,000 agents are there, Russians, China, and Turkey. Those, in my opinion, are the four main international actors that were facing. So, it would be great if in Venezuela we have a solution through negotiation, through election. It would be great, and President Guaido has promoted that. But at the same time, and this is a personal opinion, I'm going to end with this. This is a very personal opinion, and I know this is sensitive. When you have millions of people, when you have the life of millions of people in risk, such as Venezuela, that every day people die because of hunger, because of diseases, because of violence, because of human rights violation, and that country is in risk to be empty because everyone will flee or will die, because in my opinion, in Venezuela we're having a slow motion genocide because things have changed. Now you cannot kill some maybe 300,000 people like in other parts of the world decades ago. We're having a slow motion genocide. The international legal framework has some mechanism that could be implemented to protect those people, like the Rio Treaty or the responsibility to protect, among others. And it's legitimate. That's David Smolansky opinion, because millions of Venezuelans are in risk. So I'm gonna stop there saying that I shouldn't be here. I should be in my country. I believe in exile. If I had been asked years ago, even when I was mayor, that I would be speaking in such a beautiful place and with so many people in Richmond about Venezuela, probably would have laughed, but here I am, because I am convinced that we have to keep the fight. We have to persevere. And I am inspired of my family. My grandparents left the Soviet Union. They were persecuted in Ukraine. And they landed to Cuba. And my grandparents, with my father, that was born in Cuba, were also persecuted. And they had to flee Cuba and arrive to Venezuela. And then it was my turn. I will live in Richmond today. And then it was my turn, the third generation that have been persecuted by this type of regime. So that has been my inspiration not to stop working and not stop being involved in the servant as a public servant. I don't have children, but my biggest dream is to have my children in Venezuela, to see them study in my country, to see them working in my country, to see them enjoying our country with freedom and democracy. And I'm sure that we're going to achieve that. And when adults, if they got all the opportunities in Venezuela and they don't have to flee like I had to do with my father, my grandparents, I would say mission accomplished no matter where I'll be. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Mayor, I have a question for you. Well, a statement and a question. I lived in Caracas, Venezuela back in 88 and 89 and worked for the Department of State at the embassy. My children went to school with Venezuelan children and children from all over the world. So you have part of my heart. My question to you, also that was during the time of the economic riots. They were starting back then. What do you suggest that we do as regular American citizens not working for the government? I would love to hear that.
No, thank you for your kind word. That's a question that we always have on purpose. Thank you for your kind words and your question. And that's a very important one because we always get it. And first of all, you cannot imagine how powerful it is to do this type of meeting for our country. I mean, we have taken some pictures and videos, and we're going to share that to social media. So the people that are fighting in Venezuela, that are keeping the hope to see that in Richmond, United States, there are 100, 200 people participating in a conference on Venezuela. That is very powerful. Second, we have to keep increasing the pressure. Sometimes we think that international community pressure is only on the presidents, but you have to do it through any level. You have to go to your regional authorities or governments. You have to go to your local authorities, council and mayors. Everyone must know what's going on in Venezuela, and they should embrace that topic, and they should promote policies to restore democracy and freedom. And third, there are so many initiatives to help people inside Venezuela and outside Venezuela that are in need of humanitarian assistance, that any work that it could be done to provide them food, to provide them medicine, to provide them even clothes, that's also very important, because literally you will be saving a life of so many, especially children.
You know, I see the disaster that we have today. It's the future that I, don't see at all. Venezuela is going to be even a poorer country than it was when Chávez took over. Chávez took over because the poor were with him. So now we have less money and more poor, and we're going to bring back a democracy with the same people who were in power, when Chávez took over. So this futuristic blindness that I would like to somebody, answer, how are we going to change difference, not only in Venezuela, but in the whole of Latin America. I mean, we can talk about Argentina. We can even talk now about Spain, where Sanchez wouldn't meet with Guaidó when he was there. where he's in power now by 2 votes, and the right and left are beginning to argue with each other like they haven't in 80 years. So this is a chronic problem that we have all over Latin America. Maybe it's not as bad as it is in Venezuela right now, but for the future, can any of you give us a more happy ending?
Well, I'm not sure that as soon as we restore democracy and freedom in Venezuela, the ones who are going to run the country are the ones who were before Chávez. And President Guaidó is the main example of it. When Hugo Chávez came to power, Juan Guaidó was like me, 14, 15 years old. So I truly believe, not only my generation, but the people that are even coming after our generation, because we have grown up, or we have been born in a dictatorship. I don't know what is that country that I described to you, that was stable, that had a solid democracy, that had a booming economy. I just know it because my parents told me, because of what I saw in school, in university, what I have read in books, but I did not have that Venezuela. My generation and the generation after didn't enjoy that Venezuela. So when you are born, or when you grow up in a place where you don't have freedom, and you don't have democracy, you don't have rule of law, and you don't even have food and medicine, you learn a lot. And I think on the future, and I was saying, Venezuela could not depend only on oil. Venezuela could diversify its economy through the minery, through the gas fields, through the agriculture. We have such a fertile soil, through tourism. So that's the Venezuela that I see. And it will be hard, yes. Venezuela will not become safe from one day to another. You will not see food from one day to another. You will not see medicine from one week to another. But if we're able to start building institutions, give opportunities to civil society, and also try to get involved the people who have fled, and especially the ones who have been successful and have had a very nice experience in countries such as the US or countries in Europe, I think Venezuela could recover faster than what many people think.
Thank you for your remarks, both of you. 2 questions. What role did Russia have in the collapse of Guaido's attempted revolution? And secondly, what should the U.S. government be doing?
Russia has been involved in Venezuela since Chávez came in. They provide a lot of military equipment to the government. A lot of the interpretation, unlike China, which lent Venezuela $65 billion and has an economic interest, and the Venezuelans owe the Chinese $20 billion at this point, so there's a real interest there. The Russians tended to be more of a geopolitical kind of, you're close to us in Ukraine, we're going to be in your backyard here. And so it was a positioning, it was a geopolitical positioning. That has changed a lot in the last year, when Russia is involved in very much helping Maduro with the oil economy, and is involved more in the economic sector. Their state-owned enterprise is playing a very important role in sustaining Maduro. So Russia is a key player, and this is not something I would have said 2 years ago, but it's something in 2020 that I think is a real reality, and I don't see any signs that they're going to pull back. There have been attempts by the U.S. officials to try to talk to the Russians, to engage with the Russians, and they haven't been very successful so far. But that is definitely a major concern.
Mayor, this is probably a question maybe you can answer more, or maybe both of you can answer. I'm not really sure. But when the Chávez regime banned private gun ownership in 2012, do you think when the Chávez government banned private gun ownership in 2012? Do you think it made it easier for the government, the police, the military to oppress the population? And do you think that we would be in a different position now had that not been implemented and taken effect?
Yeah, well, that's a very smart question. In Venezuela, Venezuela is a country of 30 million people, 31 million people. Probably now we're 26 because of the 5 million people that have fled. There was a very important study was made almost 10 years ago that apparently 20 million Venezuela have a gun. And because of the humanitarian crisis and all the political turmoil, one of the things that always is under the radar, but it was my priority when I was mayor, is that Venezuela is a very violent country. It is a country that, because of crime, almost 350,000 people have been killed since Chávez Maduro regime started. And in my opinion, is that it has become almost like a state policy thing. You don't do anything on security. You have more than 90% of impunity, so the gangs just feel free to do whatever they want. So the gun company are under control of the state. It is provided by a company. Its name is Cabin. But having said that, a lot of the weapons also that are now in Venezuela are bought from other parts. Chávez invested a lot on buying billions on buying military equipment, and all the equipment that was used on the public order when I was illegally removed and under arrest warrant on 2017 were bought from China. So it's difficult to answer your question at the end of the day. If that would have changed, one of the things that I am concerned, and we have to work more as soon as we restore democracy and freedom in Venezuela, is that Venezuela has to become a safe place to live. And basically what I have heard on the visits that I have made to the region is that people want to go back. Emotionally, everyone in Venezuela that has fled wants to go back. But probably the most important thing for them to go back is to have a country safe, that is able to reduce crime and citizen security becomes a priority in all levels of governments.
Hi. Sorry. For one, thank you both. Hello. Sorry. Thank you both so much for everything you've said today and for being here. You've opened my eyes to a lot more than I was aware of prior, because I wasn't very educated on this issue, so thank you so much for that. I was more so wondering your opinion on if you feel that civilian protests have had any substantial effect on the Venezuelan crisis, or if you felt they've been more devastating than substantial. Thank you.
Well, I think, they were quite, there have been sustained protests. I think they've been very, very important. I think that the biggest test today for President Guaido, maybe even more important than his international tour, is his ability to mobilize people on the streets of Venezuela and really build enormous pressure on the regime. That happened remarkably a year ago. Some things happen though. People, as the mayor talked about, people are in terrible economic straits. They're focused on surviving. And it's hard to think about going out to the street if they're just trying to they think about two things. One, staying in the country and surviving, or two, leaving. Because the situation is that bad. So I think this is going to be a test of President Guaido moving forward, and he certainly has shown the ability. Nobody, and this goes back to what the mayor was saying about other leaders and why Guaido is different. Not only is he different because he's credible that he's not going to go back to the pre-Chavez days. The first opposition leader, in my view, that when he says that, people believe him, which is very, very important. And second of all, he's the only leader who's been able to A, unify the opposition, and B, mobilize people in the streets. And of course, people get tired, they're disappointed, they're frustrated, they thought the end was near a year ago. But you know, we just have to keep fighting and going back. So yeah, I think it's very, very important.
Thank you both for being here again. So the Mayor, you said that you believe like international institutional intervention is the best path forward for Venezuela. What policies or organizations can we advocate for here on the ground in America to help support that and help bring that closer to being something that's brought to the global ethic?
Yes, maybe I didn't explain myself well. I didn't say it was the best option. I said it's a legitimate option. And it has to be considered when the life of millions are in risk, like what is going on with Venezuelans right now, because every day you're having people fleeing or dying because of hunger, diseases, human rights violation, and violence. So there are ways to do that on a consensus on international community. One of them is what I call the TR, the Rio Treaty, which has been reactivated at the Organization of American States. Every country but one voted in favor, and there is one article that allows to use a military coalition to protect the people that are in risk. As Mr. Shifter said, of course, not every Latin American country is on that page, but at the same time, I don't think they have to say that publicly. Those things have to be discussed privately, because you are facing a very dangerous regime that you cannot reveal your strategy. Then you have the responsibility to protect. They have to be implemented through the United Nations. Of course, we have there the problem with China and Russia and the Security Council, but I think even we have those countries there that they veto in the Security Council a resolution for free and fair elections a year ago, by the way. So that's how involved are Russia in Venezuela. They veto a resolution for free and fair elections. So could you imagine if they discuss R2P? But I think even though you have to start discussing that, you have to put that on the agenda. But you have to discuss that on a very serious way, in a very responsible way. That's not a thing that you have to be on Twitter or on Instagram, like doing a campaign. And there are other mechanisms that the international legal framework allow to if we have a different solution, welcome to that solution. But if we don't, I think it is irresponsible to not discussing that when you are discussing it to protect the life of millions of people. Because the worst thing that could happen to Venezuela is that nothing happens. That's the worst thing that happens.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, I guess this is more of a historical question, why Chávez was unable to diversify the economy and move it away from oil, especially like in 2002 and stuff. Why he was unable to and why he didn't, yeah.
Oil that goes from $10, $12 to $140, that's the goose that can lay the golden egg. You're not going to focus on diversifying. What I do think is true is that I think there is a consensus, and the mayor will correct me, but I think there's a consensus and a recognition, even by those who preceded Chávez, that if they had to do it over again, they would have diversified the economy a lot more, precisely because of these wild fluctuations in prices, sort of a boom and bust, and Venezuela has to become more diversified. And I think the people who are thinking about the so-called day after, whenever that day after is, when we have a new government, I think clearly the oil sector is going to be important because that's what the country has. But I think over time, eventually you want to have a much more diversified economy. It's just, you may say you want to, but if you have those kind of oil prices, you just rely on that. It's easy.
And just something that I always share as a foreigner visit my country is to take them to a gas station. So we went to the gas station and we put gasoline in the car, and at the same time I invited them coffee in the convenience store or a water. The coffee and the water was way more expensive than the gasoline in the car. And that was years ago when I was a student and then I was a mayor. But now, and this is literally now, it's free gasoline. I mean, gasoline in Venezuela is free. Imagine if you take a car. Imagine if you take it today. Start driving from. Sorry. Yeah. Imagine if you take your car now and you start driving, I don't know, from here to Miami to go to the Super Bowl on Sunday or to see President Guaido on Saturday, and you don't pay anything on gasoline. I mean, it's free all the time. Actually, sometimes we still have some people that put the gasoline, it's not like this that you put it, and those workers, sometimes they use the gasoline to clean the street. So it's insane that thing in Venezuela, and then that needs to change with the diversifying the economy. I just wanted to give that anecdote, Mr. Chairman.